What if your millionaire boss witnessed the worst humiliation of your life? A housekeeper brought only $50 to her first date, and the man destroyed her in front of everyone at the restaurant. But what she didn't know is that her employer was sitting 3 tables away watching every second. What he did next changed everyone's destiny forever. Tell me, where are you watching this from? If you want to know how this incredible story ended, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. You won't believe the ending. The Manhattan Olive restaurant exhaled aromas of saffron and smoked paprika as the New York evening light filtered through the leaded glass windows. Catherine Foster nervously adjusted the only elegant dress she owned, a navy blue piece bought on sale 3 years earlier, and watched as her date scanned the menu with disdain. Those $50 she had taken from her savings for this date had cost her weeks of austere lunches and extra hours cleaning marble at the mansion where she worked. "Is this all you're bringing for a first date?" Richard whispered with a cruel smile, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I thought a woman your age would know that these places require a certain financial standing." The words pierced like needles into her dignity. At 42, Catherine had learned to make her presence invisible while cleaning the mansions of the Upper East Side, the exclusive New York neighborhood where fortunes were displayed without shame and servants remained in the shadows. But that night, her invisibility was transforming into public humiliation. What Catherine didn't know was that 3 tables away, Karim Al-Fayed, her employer of 7 years, was observing the scene with a mixture of indignation and sadness. The Lebanese businessman immediately recognized the calloused hands that daily caressed his Persian carpets with reverence and prepared cardamom tea according to traditions he had brought from Beirut. Sometimes destiny uses our deepest wounds to weave the threads of our redemption, thought Karim, as an ancient memory of his younger sister in the mountains of Lebanon crossed his heart like a silent lightning bolt. At that moment, without any of them knowing it, 3 destinies began to intertwine under the amber light of the rustic lamps, each carrying invisible wounds that only time and compassion could heal. The sun was barely rising over the New York skyline when Catherine was already scrubbing the white marble floors in the Al-Fayed mansion. Her movements, precise and efficient, had been perfected over 7 years of service. Each surface reflected her silent dedication. Each immaculate corner was witness to postponed dreams. "Good morning, Catherine." Karim Al-Fayed's deep voice startled her. It was unusual for the master of the house to appear at this hour in the main hall, much less to greet her directly. Catherine quickly straightened up, nervously adjusting her apron. "Good morning, Mr. Al-Fayed. I'd like to speak with you in my office when you finish here." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. Had she done something wrong? Had he seen her last night at the restaurant? The shame of that moment returned like an acidic wave. 2 hours later, standing before the imposing Lebanese cedar door of the office, Catherine took a deep breath before knocking softly. Upon entering, the view of New York through the windows momentarily took her breath away. Fifth Avenue stretched like a golden artery under the morning sun, so close yet so distant from her reality. "Please sit down," Karim indicated, pointing to a leather armchair in front of his desk. Catherine remained perched on the edge of the seat, uncomfortable with this breach of hierarchy. "Catherine, I've been observing your work for years. Your dedication, your attention to every detail." Karim paused, carefully choosing his words. "Last night I was at the Manhattan Olive." The blood drained from Catherine's face. Her hands, those calloused hands from years of service, began to tremble in her lap. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he continued, surprising her. "The one who should feel shame is the man who didn't know how to value your presence." A dense silence settled between them. Through the window, the sounds of New York reached them muffled. Horns, distant conversations, urban life in full swing. "I have a proposal for you," Karim finally said, opening a drawer in his desk. "I've noticed how you look at the nursing books in the library. Is that what you always wanted to study?" The question fell like a stone in still waters. Catherine had never shared that dream with anyone in the mansion. "Yes, sir," she replied in a thread of a voice. "Before my father got sick, I was saving for college, but then—" Her voice faded. There was no need to continue. Karim slid a golden envelope across the desk. "I want to finance your nursing studies. You'll keep your salary while you study, reducing your work hours so you can attend classes." Catherine held her breath. Had she heard correctly? "Mr. Al-Fayed, I can't accept. That's too much." "It's not charity, Catherine," he interrupted firmly. "It's an investment. In my culture, helping someone get an education is an honor." His dark eyes seemed to look beyond her, to a distant past. "My younger sister never had this opportunity. She was forced to marry young, abandoning her dreams of becoming a doctor. She died 20 years ago without having been able to choose her own path." The businessman's personal revelation left Catherine speechless. He had never before spoken of his family. "When I saw you last night, enduring that humiliation with dignity, I saw something in you that reminded me of her. The same indomitable spirit." Catherine looked at her own hands, rough and reddened from years of hard work. Could these same hands someday heal the sick, bring relief, hold those who suffer? "Think about it," said Karim, rising to indicate that the conversation was over. "I don't need an immediate answer." But they both knew that a seed of hope had just been planted, and that nothing would be the same again in that house of white marble and cardamom aromas. "An Arab millionaire wants to pay for your studies? And you think he doesn't want anything in return?" Martha Foster's voice, broken by years of work in the Virginia countryside, came loaded with skepticism over the phone. Catherine closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the wall of her small room in the service area. "Mom, it's not like that. Mr. Al-Fayed is a respectable man. He's treated me with dignity all these years. My daughter, the rich don't give without expecting something in return. Remember what happened to the Johnson girl?" Catherine sighed. The stories from her hometown always ended in warnings, as if distrust were the only way to survive in a hostile world. As she listened to her mother's concerns, her gaze fell on the golden envelope that remained on her nightstand. Inside, besides the offer, was an application form for Columbia University and a check to cover the tuition. The weekend arrived with an overcast sky over the metropolis. Catherine took advantage of her day off to walk around the Columbia campus, observing the young students entering and leaving the historic buildings. Could she, at 42, mix among them? Wouldn't it be like an old tree trying to transplant itself among new shoots? Her steps led her to the School of Nursing. She stopped in front of the bulletin board, where colorful posters announced conferences, study groups, and activities. One poster in particular caught her attention. "It's never too late to heal perspectives in geriatric nursing." "Interested in studying here?" Catherine started. A woman approximately her age, in a white coat with a professor badge, was watching her kindly. I was just looking," Catherine replied, suddenly feeling that she didn't belong in this place. "I'm Helen Davis, coordinator of the nursing program." The woman introduced herself, extending her hand. "And let me tell you that we have students of all ages. Life experience is an invaluable gift in this profession." Those words, pronounced with disarming naturalness, pierced the armor of doubt that Catherine had built. "I worked as a nursing assistant before studying nursing," Helen continued as they walked down the corridor. "I started college at 38, with 2 teenage children. It was difficult, yes, but every sacrifice was worth it." As they parted, Helen handed her card. "If you decide to take the step, look for me. Sometimes all we need is someone who has walked the path before us." Back at the Al-Fayed mansion, Catherine ran into Fatima, Karim's daughter. At 23, Fatima was the antithesis of what would be expected of an heiress to a fortune, rebellious, carefree, constantly challenging her father's expectations. "Where were you?" asked the young woman, curious to see Catherine in street clothes on a Sunday afternoon. "Visiting the university," Catherine replied, surprising herself with her boldness in sharing this. Fatima's dark eyes, so similar to her father's, lit up with genuine interest. "Are you going to accept my father's offer?" "You should. He never makes this kind of offer." "You knew?" Fatima shrugged. "The walls have ears in this house. Besides, my father talks to me more than he thinks." A complicit silence settled between them, momentarily erasing the barriers of class and position. "If I had your opportunity," Fatima began, and for the first time Catherine saw vulnerability in this young woman who seemed to have everything. "My father expects me to continue his businesses, but what I really want is to teach, to work with children." That unexpected confession stirred something in Catherine. Perhaps the chains that bound people were not always visible, and the freedom to choose one's own path was a scarce privilege in both palaces and cabins. That night, as she prepared dinner for the Al-Fayed family, Catherine made her decision. The aroma of lamb with spices permeated the kitchen as she mentally rehearsed the words with which she would accept Karim's offer. Sometimes, opportunities come disguised as impossibilities, she thought, remembering an old proverb that her grandmother used to repeat on Virginia winter nights. The black Mercedes advanced along the Virginia road between fields of century-old oaks. The contrast couldn't be greater. Karim Al-Fayed, in his impeccable Italian designer suit, and Catherine, in a simple flowered dress, traveling together to the small town where she was born. "It wasn't necessary for you to accompany me, sir," Catherine repeated for the umpteenth time, uncomfortable with the idea that her boss would see the modest house where she grew up. "Your mother needs to see who I really am," Karim replied calmly. "I understand her reservations. In her place, I would feel the same distrust." The town appeared on the horizon as a cluster of white houses grouped around a church. For Catherine, each mile traveled was a journey back in time toward her roots. For Karim, it was a window into a rural American world that he knew only through books and movies. Martha Foster waited on the threshold of her house, a modest construction of brick and whitewash with pots of red geraniums flanking the entrance. Her face, tanned by decades of sun and hard work, reflected a mixture of curiosity and apprehension when the luxurious car stopped at her door. "Mum?" Catherine embraced the small but strong woman who had raised her alone after her father's early death. "This is Mr. Al-Fayed, my employer." Karim slightly inclined his head as a sign of respect. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Foster. Your daughter is an invaluable treasure in my home." Martha evaluated the man before her with the sharp wisdom that years had chiseled into her gaze. "Come in, sir. The food is ready." The interior of the house was simple but immaculate. Family photographs in worn frames decorated the whitewashed walls. On the kitchen table, a humble but abundant feast awaited: fried chicken, country ham, local cheese, and a jug of homemade apple cider. "In my culture," Karim began as they shared the food, "sharing bread creates a sacred bond between host and guest." "In ours too," replied Martha, serving cider into the businessman's glass. "That's why I want to ask you directly. What do you really intend by offering studies to my daughter?" Catherine tensed at her mother's frankness, but Karim smiled with genuine appreciation for that raw honesty. "Mrs. Foster, 20 years ago I lost my younger sister. Zara wanted to be a doctor, but our family traditions forced her into an arranged marriage with a man who extinguished her spirit." Karim's voice trembled slightly. "When I see Catherine, I see the same silent determination that Zara had. I couldn't help my sister then. Today I have the power and resources to make a difference." A dense silence settled in the small kitchen. Outside, the wind gently moved the branches of a century-old cherry tree that shaded the house. "My daughter was always the smartest in town," Martha finally said, with a pride she didn't try to disguise. "Her teacher said she could go anywhere she wanted, but life imposed other trials on us." Catherine listened, moved by the exchange between these two seemingly irreconcilable worlds that now dialogued around her future. After the meal, while Catherine cleaned the dishes, Martha led Karim to the backyard, where a small garden provided vegetables for the house. "My husband is buried under that cherry tree," the woman pointed to a particularly vigorous tree. "He died when Catherine was 16. She abandoned her studies to help me with the debts. She never complained, not once." Karim observed the cherry tree, understanding the profound symbolism it had for this family. "In Lebanon, Mrs. Foster, olive trees are sacred. Some are more than 1,000 years old and have seen empires born and die. They represent resilience, the ability to flourish even on rocky ground." He paused, seeking the exact words. "Your daughter is like those olive trees. It's time for her to bloom." Martha's eyes moistened. With a surprising gesture, she took the businessman's hand between her own, rough and worked. "Take care of her, Mr. Al-Fayed. She's all I have in this world." Back in New York, under a starry sky that connected Virginia to the metropolis, Catherine broke the contemplative silence that had settled between them. "Thank you for doing this, sir." "Karim," he replied. "I think after today, you can call me by my name when we're alone." An invisible barrier had vanished between employer and employee. What neither of them could foresee was how this journey would transform not only Catherine's future, but also Karim's restless heart and Fatima's rebellious spirit, creating waves that would reach even the arrogant Richard and Martha herself, weaving an invisible network of intertwined destinies. The School of Nursing building stood imposing before Catherine on her first day of classes. The new pen trembled between her fingers as she tried to take notes on basic anatomy. Around her, students who could be her children chatted animatedly, exchanging cultural references that she barely understood. "May I sit here?" Catherine looked up. A woman of approximately 50, with grey hair tied back in a practical ponytail, was pointing to the empty seat beside her. "Of course," Catherine replied, grateful not to be the only mature student in the room. "I'm Patricia," the woman introduced herself with a warm smile. "Nursing assistant for 20 years. I finally decided to get the full degree. Catherine, I work as a domestic employee. It's my first day at the university." Instead of the judgment Catherine feared, she found admiration in her new colleague's eyes. "That takes a lot of courage. We'll be the veterans of the class." That instant friendship was the first unexpected gift of her new life, but the challenges were not slow to appear. The long hours of study after reduced but exhausting days at the Al-Fayed house began to take their toll. Weekends disappeared under mountains of books and notes. Her hands, accustomed to harsh cleaning products, now protested when she had to write for hours. At the mansion, the dynamics were also changing. Isabella, the Cuban-American cook, and Michael, the Puerto Rican gardener, observed Catherine's new situation with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. The invisible hierarchies of domestic service had been altered. "Now you think you're too good to clean bathrooms, huh?" Isabella commented one afternoon, while Catherine studied physiology in the kitchen during her break. "I never said that," Catherine replied, hurt. "I'm still doing my job." "But not like before," Michael interjected. "The winter garden hasn't had the care you used to give it for weeks." Catherine closed her book, facing an uncomfortable truth. Her transformation had a price that was not only paid by her. That same night, as she prepared cardamom tea for Karim, Catherine made a decision. She knocked softly on the office door and entered with the silver tray. "May I speak with you a moment?" "Karim?" The businessman nodded, indicating that she should sit. "I think you should hire someone to cover my reduced hours," Catherine said directly. "Isabella and Michael are taking on too much extra work." Karim observed her intensely. "Is that what really worries you? Or is there something else?" Catherine lowered her gaze to her hands, where the scars from years of hard work were beginning to soften slightly. "I feel like I'm betraying who I am," she finally confessed. "As if by studying nursing I were rejecting my previous life, being ashamed of who I've been all these years." "Catherine," Karim's voice acquired an unusual softness, "growing doesn't mean rejecting your roots. It means honoring them by becoming all you can be." Outside the office, invisible to both, Fatima was listening to the conversation. The young heiress had begun to observe Catherine with growing interest, intrigued by this woman who had worked for her family for years, but whom she was only now beginning to truly see. The next day, to everyone's surprise, Fatima appeared in the kitchen during lunch preparation. "May I learn to cook?" she asked Isabella directly, who almost dropped a pot in astonishment. "You? Cook?" Isabella didn't hide her amazement. "Why would you want to dirty your hands with this?" "Because it's time I learned to do something useful," Fatima replied, with a determination that reminded of her father. "And because I want to help while Catherine studies." The news that the young lady of the house now spent afternoons learning to prepare paella and Cuban ropa vieja spread like wildfire among the staff. For Catherine, it was a revelation to see the rebellious young woman gradually transform, finding satisfaction in tasks she had previously considered beneath her position. One afternoon, as they studied together in the kitchen, Catherine her anatomy texts and Fatima a traditional American cookbook, the young woman made a confession. "I've never told anyone this, but I want to be an elementary school teacher." Catherine looked up from her notes, surprised by the vulnerability in Fatima's voice. "Does your father know? It would break his heart. He's built his entire empire for me to inherit someday. How can I tell him that I want to teach children to read instead of running his businesses?" Catherine recognized in that question the echo of her own doubts. The expectations of others could be golden cages or rusty iron ones, but cages nonetheless. "Sometimes," she replied, measuring her words, "the greatest act of love toward those who love us is to allow them to know our true heart, as painful as it may be at first." That conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Two women from seemingly irreconcilable worlds, united by the shared desire to reinvent themselves despite fear and expectations. What neither of them knew was that soon they would face a decision that would test all their principles and definitively transform the dynamics of the Al-Fayed mansion. The flames rose to the New York night sky, tinting the facade of the Al-Fayed mansion orange and red. The West Wing, where Karim's office and the library were located, burned fiercely as firefighters tried to contain the advance of the fire. Catherine observed the scene from the garden, embracing a trembling Fatima. The fire had started during the 4th of July celebration, while the family and staff were enjoying dinner on the patio. A toppled candle, a short circuit. No one was sure of the exact origin. "The company documents. Everything was there," Fatima murmured, her pale face reflecting the dancing flames. Catherine immediately thought of her scholarship agreements, the checks for the university, everything that had changed her life in the last few months. Would it also disappear among the flames? Karim remained strangely serene, giving instructions to the firefighters and staff. His face, illuminated by the reddish glow, seemed sculpted in ancient stone. 3 days later, the family temporarily moved into a penthouse in Midtown while repairs began. The routine had been completely altered. With no office to work in, Karim spent more time at home, interacting with the staff in a closer and more informal manner. One morning, as Catherine prepared breakfast, she heard raised voices coming from the living room. She stopped by the half-open door, recognizing the voices of Karim and his lawyer. "The insurance policy will cover the material damages, but many important documents are irretrievable," the lawyer explained. "Among them, the informal agreements like that of the domestic employee." "Catherine?" Karim corrected firmly. "Yes, Catherine," the lawyer conceded with impatience. "What I'm trying to explain is that this is the perfect moment to reconsider certain commitments. Legally, there is no obligation to maintain that agreement. No one could blame you for cancelling it after this disaster." Catherine's heart stopped. Through the crack, she could see how Karim slowly rose, his figure projecting an elongated shadow on the Persian carpet that they had saved from the fire. "Jamil," Karim's voice was soft but cutting like the edge of a Damascus dagger. "There are commitments that transcend legal documents. I hired you to solve problems, not to suggest that I break my word." Catherine moved away silently, her soul suspended between fear and hope. That afternoon, as she studied in the small room she had been assigned in the penthouse, Karim surprised her with an unexpected visit. "I imagine you heard my conversation with Jamil this morning," he said directly, sitting across from her. Catherine nodded, unable to lie. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop." "I know," he replied with a slight smile. "In Lebanon we have a saying, 'Important words always find their way to the ears that should hear them.'" Karim extracted an envelope from his jacket. It wasn't golden like the first one, but a simple white envelope with a bank's letterhead. "I've established a permanent educational fund," he explained, handing it to her. "Not just for you, but also for Isabella and Michael, if they wish to continue their education. The fire destroyed papers, Catherine, not promises." The tears Catherine had contained since the fire finally overflowed from her eyes. They weren't tears of relief for the secured scholarship, but for something deeper. The confirmation that there were people whose integrity remained unshakable even when fire ravaged their certainties. That night, as the family dined in the improvised dining room, Fatima made an announcement that fell like a bomb on the recovered apparent calm. "Father, I've applied for admission to the School of Education at Columbia." Karim's fork was suspended halfway between his plate and his mouth. The silence that followed seemed to contain all the weight of the Mediterranean. "Education?" he finally asked, with a voice that Catherine had never heard before, a mixture of incredulity and something resembling fear. "I want to be a teacher," Fatima continued, with a firmness that she had clearly been rehearsing. "I know you expected me to study business to eventually run your enterprises, but that's not my path." Catherine held her breath. Isabella and Michael exchanged looks of astonishment. The staff knew they should withdraw during family situations like this, but no one dared to move. "Is it because of Catherine?" Karim asked, turning his penetrating gaze toward her. "Is her example what has led you to this decision?" Catherine felt the floor opening beneath her feet. Had she been the indirect cause of this family rupture? "Don't blame Catherine," Fatima replied, resting a protective hand on the employee's arm. "She simply helped me find the courage to be honest, something I should have done a long time ago." Karim rose abruptly, his napkin falling to the floor in an unusually careless gesture for such a meticulous man. "I need to think," he said simply, before leaving the dining room. In the dense silence that followed, Fatima took Catherine's hand under the table. "Don't worry," whispered the young woman. "Fire purifies, remember? That's what he always says when he talks about the incense he burns during his prayers." Catherine nodded, but inwardly she wondered if some fires, instead of purifying, simply reduced to ashes what had cost so much effort to build. Times Square in New York City buzzed with activity as Catherine and Fatima shared coffee at one of the historic cafes. Around them, tourists photographed the century-old facades and groups of New Yorkers enjoyed the fall sun. "It's been a week since your father has barely spoken," Catherine commented, stirring her coffee with concern. "I've never seen him like this." Fatima sighed, playing with the sugar packet without opening it. "He's processing it in his own way. In our family, silences are as eloquent as words." Since Fatima's announcement about her education studies, a silent tension had settled in the provisional penthouse where they lived. Karim spent more time out, arriving late and leaving early, avoiding the family meals he had previously valued so much. "Do you know what hurts him the most?" Fatima continued, looking at the giant screens that dominated the center of the square. "It's not that I don't want to follow in his footsteps. It's that he believes I'm rejecting my Lebanese heritage, our surname." Catherine then remembered the conversations she had heard over years while cleaning Karim's office. The international calls, the tense negotiations, the titanic efforts to maintain the prestige of the Al-Fayed surname in a foreign country. "Your surname is important to him because it represents everything he left behind," Catherine reflected. "His land, his culture, his family history." "Exactly," Fatima nodded with a sad smile. "For him, I am the continuation of the Al-Fayeds in America. Each time he insisted that I study business, he was really asking me not to let our roots die." A group of children ran past their table, chasing pigeons with crystalline laughter. Fatima observed them with an expression that mixed tenderness and resolution. "But there are many ways to honor a name, don't you think?" That question hung in the air like the aroma of freshly made coffee. As they returned to the penthouse, Catherine observed the city with new eyes. New York, with its mixture of influences from all over the world, was living testimony that identities could intertwine without losing their essence. The Art Deco architecture, the Middle Eastern flavors that had become part of the city's cuisine, the foreign words that sprinkled American English, everything spoke of a fusion that enriched rather than diluted. That night, as Catherine reviewed her geriatric nursing notes, she heard something unusual. Traditional Lebanese music softly emerging from Fatima's room. Following the sound, she found the door ajar. Inside, Fatima was practicing steps of dabke, the traditional Lebanese dance, following a tutorial on her laptop. Feeling observed, Fatima stopped, but instead of showing embarrassment, she smiled and invited Catherine to enter. "I'm preparing a surprise for my father," she explained, wiping sweat from her forehead. "If I can't convince him with words, perhaps I can make him understand with something deeper." In the following days, Catherine witnessed a silent transformation. Fatima spent hours practicing the dance, perfecting movements that she carried in her blood, but had never explored. Simultaneously, she studied the educational history of Lebanon, discovering with amazement the rich academic tradition of Beirut. One afternoon, while helping Fatima prepare baklava following the family recipe she had obtained from her grandmother in Beirut, Catherine dared to ask, "Why education? Of all professions, why did you choose teaching?" Fatima kneaded the phyllo dough with skillful fingers, a newly acquired dexterity after weeks of practice. "Because teachers are guardians of stories," she replied simply. "When I was little and we visited Beirut, my grandmother told me stories about our ancestors, about the mountains of Lebanon, about the traditions that survived wars and migrations. Those stories connected me with something bigger than myself." Her hands sprinkled ground pistachios over the dough, with the precision of one performing a sacred ritual. I want to be that bridge for other children, especially for those between two worlds, like me. The day of Karim's birthday arrived with the sweet aroma of freshly baked baklava permeating the apartment. Catherine had helped Fatima transform the living room into a small Lebanese corner, with silk cushions on the floor, filigree lamps projecting geometric patterns on the walls, and the soft sound of the oud, Arab lute, creating an atmosphere that instantly transported one to Beirut. When Karim arrived that night, he stopped abruptly on the threshold. His eyes scanned the scene with incredulity, finally resting on his daughter, who was wearing a traditional Lebanese outfit that had belonged to her mother. "What is all this?" he asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "It's my answer," Fatima said simply. What followed was a night that none of them would forget. Fatima danced the dabke with a passion that drew silent tears from her father. She served traditional food prepared with her own hands, narrating the history and meaning of each dish. And finally, when the environment was impregnated with nostalgia and reconciliation, she handed her father a framed document. It was her final project proposal for education, intercultural education, integrating the Arab legacy in the American school curriculum. "I'm not abandoning our surname, Father," Fatima said softly, as Karim read the document with trembling hands. "I'm finding my own way to honor it." The embrace that followed was like a bridge over an abyss that had seemed insurmountable. Catherine observed from a distance, understanding that she was witnessing not just a family reconciliation, but something deeper, the exact moment when the past and future found a way to coexist without destroying each other. Later, when Fatima had retired to rest, Karim found Catherine silently cleaning up the kitchen. "This is also your work," he said, not as an accusation but as an acknowledgement. Catherine gently shook her head. Fatima found her own path. I was just there to support her. "Sometimes," Karim replied with a tired but genuine smile. "Being there is exactly what someone needs to find the courage to be who they really are." That night, as New York slept under a starry sky, 3 people in a midtown penthouse began to understand that true identity didn't reside in names or professions, but in the ability to build bridges between seemingly irreconcilable worlds. New York Presbyterian Hospital stood like a white fortress under the New York sun. Catherine advanced through the aseptic corridors, now familiar with the labyrinth of departments after 3 months of internship. Her nursing student uniform, immaculately ironed each morning, had become a second skin as natural as the apron she used to wear at the Al-Fayed mansion. "Catherine, I need your help in room 412, Helen Davis, now her internship supervisor, called. "New patient, admitted last night with severe jaundice and disorientation, possible liver cirrhosis." Catherine nodded, quickly consulting the chart Helen handed her as they walked to the elevator. The basic data paraded before her expert eyes. Male, 45 years old, no companions, admitted through the emergency room after an episode of vomiting blood in a midtown hotel. "It seems he's been avoiding medical treatment for months," Helen commented with professional concern. "The tests show advanced liver damage. The social worker is trying to contact relatives." Upon entering room 412, time seemed to stop. There, connected to monitors and with the yellowish skin characteristic of liver problems, lay Richard, the same man who had humiliated her that night at the Manhattan Olive, the turning point that had triggered all her transformation. Catherine stood motionless on the threshold as a whirlwind of contradictory emotions hit her. Incredulity, a pang of dark satisfaction at seeing him vulnerable, and finally, to her own surprise, professional compassion. "Do you know him?" Helen asked, perceiving her reaction. "Yes," Catherine replied simply. "It's a long story." Richard was sleeping, his labored breathing creating an irregular rhythm in the silence of the room. His cheeks, once rosy from the expensive wine he had drunk at her expense, were now sunken. His hands, which had counted those dollars with disdain, trembled even in dreams. "I can assign you another patient," Helen offered with understanding. Catherine breathed deeply, remembering the words of the nursing oath she had memorized, to serve without discrimination, to care without prejudice. "No, I'll stay with him," she finally decided. During the following days, Richard gradually awakened to a new reality. His condition, a consequence of years of alcoholism and a disordered life, required constant care. Catherine became his primary nurse, administering medication, monitoring vital signs, helping him with the most basic tasks that his weakened body could no longer perform alone. The recognition came one afternoon as she changed his IV. Richard's eyes, now clearer after days of treatment, fixed on her face with a mixture of confusion and growing shame. "You," he murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse. "The restaurant?" Catherine nodded, maintaining a professional neutrality that she had perfected during her months of internship. "Yes, it's me. Now rest, you need to conserve energy." But Richard weakly grabbed her wrist when she was about to leave. "Why are you helping me?" "After how I treated you." The question hung suspended between them, loaded with implications. Catherine considered her options. She could maintain professional distance. She could even secretly enjoy this inversion of roles where she now had the power. Instead, she chose honesty. "I'm learning to be a nurse," she replied simply. "My job is to care, not to judge." Those words seemed to affect Richard more deeply than any medication. His eyes filled with tears he didn't try to contain. "I don't deserve your kindness," he whispered. "It's not about deserving," Catherine responded, surprising herself with the wisdom that emanated from her own words. "Care is not something earned. It's something all human beings need at some point." That night, as she returned to the penthouse where the Al-Fayed family continued to live during the reconstruction of the mansion, Catherine felt strangely light. The confrontation she had feared had transformed into something unexpected, an opportunity to practice compassion without conditions, the true essence of her chosen vocation. At the penthouse, another surprise awaited her. Seated next to Karim in the living room, an older man with a sun-weathered face and calloused hands observed her with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "Michael!" exclaimed Catherine, recognizing the Puerto Rican gardener who had worked for the Al-Fayeds for decades. "He's come to enroll in the professional training program in ecological horticulture," Karim explained, with a complicit smile. "Your example has been contagious, it seems." Michael stood up, uncomfortable with the attention. "I always wanted to learn new techniques," he murmured, "but I thought I was too old to study." Catherine felt that an invisible circle was beginning to close. Her own journey, begun in humiliation and fear, now inspired others to challenge their self-imposed limitations. That night, while studying for her final semester exams, Catherine received a message from her mother. Martha had decided to enroll in a digital literacy workshop at the community center in her town. "If my daughter can become a nurse at 42, I can learn to use a computer at 65, the message said, accompanied by a heart emoji that some younger neighbor had taught her to insert. A week later, during a routine visit to room 412, Richard made an unexpected confession. "That night at the restaurant," he began, now sitting on the edge of the bed, visibly stronger, but still far from complete recovery. "I behaved that way because I had just lost everything in the Atlantic City casinos. I was ruined, ashamed, and I projected my self-hatred onto you." Catherine continued checking his vital signs, giving him space to talk. "It's not an excuse," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that my cruelty came from my own misery, not from anything you did." "Why are you telling me this now?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious. "Because these days of constant care have taught me more about human dignity than all my previous life," Richard replied, "and because I want to ask you something important." Catherine looked at him expectantly as she stored the blood pressure monitor in its case. "When they discharge me, I'll need a purpose to stay sober. The social worker mentioned volunteer programs here at the hospital." His voice faded, uncertain. "How you want to be a volunteer?" Catherine asked, suddenly understanding his intention. Richard nodded, his face lighting up with a cautious but genuine hope. "If you think I could be helpful, despite my past." Catherine thought about the unexpected turns her life had taken since that humiliating night, how shame had transformed into opportunity, pain into purpose, endings into beginnings. "I believe," she finally replied, "that we all deserve the opportunity to rewrite our story." That night, as New York sank into darkness and the stars appeared timidly above the city's light pollution, Catherine understood that her transformation wasn't a linear path with a clear destination, but a spiral where each turn led her to face her past from a new height, with an expanded perspective that only time and experience could grant. "I can't do it." I simply can't. Catherine's voice trembled as she threw her notes onto the kitchen table. It was 3 in the morning, and she had been trying for hours to memorize surgical procedures for the final exam in surgical nursing techniques. Fatima, who was also studying for her own education exams, looked up surprised. She had never seen Catherine, always so disciplined and methodical, lose her composure this way. "What's happening?" she asked, putting aside her own books. "This," Catherine pointed to the mountain of notes with frustration. "My brain doesn't absorb information like before. My 20-year-old classmates memorized these procedures in hours. I've been trying for days." The tears she had been containing for weeks began to flow freely. It wasn't just the exams. It was the accumulated exhaustion of months dividing her time between the hospital, studies, and the reduced but still demanding hours at the Al-Fayed house. It was the constant feeling of not fully belonging to any of these worlds. "Sometimes I think it was a mistake," she confessed quietly, "that I should have accepted my place, my previous life. At least, there I knew who I was." Fatima sat next to her, silently offering her a tissue. "Do you know what my grandmother in Beirut told me when I told her about my decision to study education?" she asked after a moment. "She said, 'The desert doesn't bloom without sandstorms that stir the dormant seeds.'" Catherine looked at her through tears. "This that you're feeling now," Fatima continued, "is your sandstorm. It's necessary." But the words of comfort, as wise as they were, couldn't erase the brutal reality that Catherine faced. She was failing. Her grades, initially promising, had begun to decline. The sleepless nights were taking a toll on her concentration during internships. The previous week she had confused medications, an error that her supervisor had corrected in time, but that tormented her with catastrophic possibilities. "It's not just about the exams," Catherine confessed, wiping away tears. "It's that I no longer know who I am. I'm not the efficient domestic employee I was, but I also can't become the competent nurse I aspire to be. I'm trapped between 2 worlds." Fatima nodded, recognizing in those words the echo of her own identity dilemma. "Perhaps you don't have to choose," she suggested after a reflective moment. "Perhaps it's about integrating, not abandoning." The conversation was interrupted by the silent appearance of Karim at the kitchen door. His expression indicated that he had heard at least part of the exchange. "Excuse me," he said, visibly uncomfortable at having witnessed a vulnerable moment. "I heard voices and thought it might be an intruder." Catherine tried to quickly compose herself, embarrassed that her employer would see her in this state. "We were just studying," she explained, hastily gathering her scattered notes. "Father," Fatima intervened, "Catherine needs a break. She's been dividing her time between 1,000 responsibilities, and she's exhausted." Karim observed Catherine attentively, noticing for the first time the deep dark circles that framed her eyes, the slight tremor of her hands, the evident signs of exhaustion that he had overlooked. "Tomorrow you won't come to work," he decided firmly. "But Mr. Al-Fayed, I don't—" "Karim," he gently corrected. "And it's not a suggestion. It's a direct order from your employer. You'll take 3 days off to prepare for your exams, with full pay." The generosity of the gesture only intensified Catherine's tears, now mixed with gratitude and a renewed shame for needing help. "It's not weakness to recognize our limits," Karim added, as if reading her thoughts. "In my culture, even the strongest warrior knows when to retreat to sharpen his sword." 3 days later, Catherine faced her final exam with renewed strength. The rest had been transformative, allowing her not only to study with greater concentration, but also to reflect on the identity crisis that tormented her. Upon leaving the exam, feeling the satisfaction of having given her best, she found Patricia, her classmate, waiting for her in the hallway. "How did it go?" asked the nursing assistant with genuine interest. "I think well," Catherine replied with cautious optimism. "And you?" "Average," Patricia confessed with a grimace. "But I'll survive. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. Is it true that you work as a domestic employee while studying?" The question fell like a stone in Catherine's stomach. Until now, she had kept her work life separate from the academic one, fearing precisely this type of conversation. "Yes," she finally replied, preparing for the condescension or pity that usually followed this revelation. "That's extraordinary," said Patricia, surprising her. "Many of the young students can barely handle the degree, and you're managing 2 lives simultaneously." Catherine blinked, disconcerted by this perspective so different from her own merciless self-criticism. "The truth is that lately I feel like I'm not doing either one well," she confessed. Patricia let out a warm laugh. "Welcome to the club. I've been an assistant for 20 years feeling exactly like that. Too prepared to clean up vomit, not enough to make clinical decisions." That honest confession was like a balm for Catherine. She wasn't alone in this identity limbo. "You know what helps me?" Patricia continued as they walked to the cafeteria. "Remembering that I'm neither one thing nor the other exclusively. I'm both things and something more. We are beings in permanent construction, Catherine." That night, as she returned to the penthouse under a New York sky tinged with orange, Catherine reflected on the wisdom contained in those simple words. The problem wasn't being divided between two worlds, but the false belief that she should belong completely to just one. Upon entering, she found Karim and Fatima in the living room, immersed in a conversation that seemed intense but friendly. On the coffee table rested an album of old photographs that Catherine had never seen. "Catherine!" exclaimed Fatima upon seeing her. "Come, we were remembering the past. Look, these are photos of my grandmother's house in Beirut." With some shyness, Catherine approached and sat with them. The photographs showed a beautiful stone house with arches and horseshoe-shaped windows surrounded by trees that looked like cedars and Mediterranean pines. "This is Zara, my sister." Karim pointed to an image where a young woman of serene beauty smiled next to a pomegranate tree in bloom. "She was studying her first year of medicine when our father arranged her marriage." Catherine observed the young woman's face, recognizing in her eyes the same quiet determination she had seen in Karim's so many times. "Do you know why I showed you this?" Karim asked after a contemplative silence. Catherine shook her head. "Because I want you to understand that your struggle is not just yours. It's the same struggle that my sister couldn't win, the same that Fatima is facing now in her own way. It's the universal struggle to define who we are against the expectations of others." That night, as the moon illuminated New York with its silver light, three people from seemingly irreconcilable worlds shared stories that transcended borders, social classes, and generations. And in that exchange of vulnerabilities, Catherine began to understand that her identity crisis was not a failure, but an integral part of the transformation process. The mirror that had shown her fragmented image was beginning to recompose itself, not to show a single cohesive identity, but a complex and beautiful mosaic where each fragment reflected an essential facet of who she was becoming. The hospital corridor stretched before Catherine like an endless tunnel. 3 weeks had passed since her final exams, and today was a special day. Richard was being discharged. During these months, she had witnessed his physical and emotional transformation, from that jaundiced and desperate man to the healthier and more reflective version who was now finishing packing his suitcase in room 412. "I'm nervous," Richard confessed, as Catherine performed her last check of his vital signs. "Out there I don't have structured schedules or controlled medication or—" He paused, looking for the right words, "or people who really care." Catherine noted the normal values on the chart. Blood pressure 120/80, temperature 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, heart rate 72 beats per minute. Perfect vital signs that contrasted with the emotional fragility that Richard didn't try to hide. "You have your rehabilitation program," she reminded him, storing the blood pressure monitor. "And the support group meets 3 times a week. You won't be alone." Richard nodded, but his eyes reflected a primitive fear that Catherine knew all too well, the terror of facing a new beginning with no guarantees of success. "Have you thought about my proposal?" he asked, changing the subject. "About volunteering." Catherine smiled. During his hospitalization, Richard had discovered an unexpected talent for connecting with other patients, especially those struggling with addictions. The social worker had suggested that he could be a valuable volunteer in the patient accompaniment program for those in recovery. "I spoke with Helen this morning," Catherine replied. "She says you can start next Monday, as long as you maintain your own treatment." Richard's face lit up with cautious hope. "Thank you. For everything. For not holding a grudge after how I treated you that night." Catherine felt a lump in her throat. Who would have imagined that that moment of humiliation at the Manhattan Olive would lead them to this exchange of mutual redemption? She had found her vocation from that incident, and now, by an extraordinary turn of fate, Richard was also finding a new purpose thanks to her. Sometimes, she replied, remembering the words that Karim had shared weeks earlier. Our deepest wounds become doors to destinies we would never have imagined. After saying goodbye to Richard, Catherine headed to the locker room to change. Her shift had ended, but she didn't feel ready to return home. Room 412, now empty, represented the closure of an important chapter in her personal transformation. She felt simultaneously liberated and disoriented, like a sailor who has navigated for months toward a destination only to discover, upon arrival, that the journey is just beginning. In the hospital cafeteria, Catherine found Helen having coffee. "All well with Richard's discharge?" her supervisor asked, indicating that she should sit. "Yes, all parameters normal. He's nervous, but I think he'll be fine." Helen studied her over her cup. "And you? Are you okay?" The question, simple but penetrating, opened a floodgate inside Catherine. "I don't know," she confessed. "I feel strange, as if I had closed a circle but didn't know what to do with that conclusion." Helen nodded understandingly. "It's normal. In nursing, we experience constant beginnings and endings. Patients who arrive, improve, and leave, or sometimes don't improve." She paused, carefully choosing her words. "The difficult thing is not tying our professional identity exclusively to those results." Catherine reflected on this idea as she returned to the Al Fayed penthouse. New York bustled with evening energy, full terraces, children returning from after-school activities, office workers hurrying to the subway, lives in constant movement, all intertwined in the complex urban choreography. Upon arriving, she found an official letter from Columbia University in the mailbox. With trembling hands, she opened it. She had passed all her final exams with excellent grades, especially in geriatric nursing and psychosocial care. "Catherine, how wonderful!" exclaimed Fatima when she shared the news. "This deserves a celebration." But under the genuine joy, Catherine felt a persistent disquiet that she couldn't name. She had reached this academic milestone, she had closed the chapter with Richard, and yet, that night while everyone slept, Catherine silently slipped out to the penthouse terrace. New York spread before her like a tapestry of twinkling lights under a velvety sky. The same city that had been the scene of her humiliation now witnessed her rebirth. However, something fundamental remained unresolved. "Can't sleep either." Karim's voice startled her. The Lebanese businessman, dressed in an elegant silk robe, held 2 steaming cups. "Mint tea," he explained, offering her one. "My mother always said it clarifies nocturnal thoughts." Catherine accepted the cup, grateful for the warmth that spread through her cold hands. The aroma of fresh mint and subtle sweetness effectively transported her to a calmer mental state. "Fatima told me about your grades," Karim commented after a contemplative silence. "I'm proud of you, though I have no right to be." Catherine smiled at the peculiar formulation. "You have every right. Without your support, I would never have gotten this far." "Support only opens doors," he replied. "Crossing them requires courage that comes only from within." The city twinkled below them like an ocean of earthly stars. Catherine thought of all the lives unfolding simultaneously. Families dining late, students preparing for exams, sick people trying to fall asleep in hospital rooms, lovers discovering each other's bodies, children dreaming of adventures. "I feel like I should be happier," she finally confessed. "I've passed my exams. My most complicated patient has been discharged with good prospects. Why do I feel this emptiness?" Karim contemplated his tea as if it contained the answer to universal questions. In Arabic we have an expression, bain bain. It means between and between. It describes that liminal space where we are no longer who we were, but also haven't become who we will be. Catherine felt that those words perfectly captured her current state. "The emptiness you feel," continued Karim, "is not absence, but potential space. Like the silence between musical notes that makes melody possible." A medical helicopter crossed the night sky, its flashing lights presumably heading toward one of the city's hospitals. Catherine followed it with her gaze, thinking of the emergencies it transported, of the professional hands that would soon mobilize to receive the patient. "Your hands are no longer just the ones that clean this house," observed Karim, following the direction of her gaze. "Now they are also hands that heal, that console, that sustain those who suffer." Catherine observed her own hands in the dim light of the terrace. They were no longer as rough as before. Hospital cleaning products were less aggressive than those she used at the mansion, but they had also acquired new skills. They could find difficult veins, change complex bandages, measure weak pulses. "Room 412 is empty now," she said, verbalizing what was really disturbing her. "And I wonder what comes next. Another patient? Another story? Another opportunity to feel simultaneously useful and insufficient?" Karim nodded understandingly. "Life is a succession of rooms that we occupy temporarily, Catherine. Some are spaces of pain, others of learning, others of joy. The only constant is the movement between them." That night conversation, held among the rooftops of New York as the city dozed, sowed a seed of understanding in Catherine. The emptiness she felt wasn't a failure, but an invitation, a liminal space between identities where the new was still gestating its definitive form. Days later, while organizing her small room in the penthouse, Catherine found the original golden envelope that Karim had given her months ago. Inside, besides the educational financing offer, there was a note that she hadn't reread. "You are not what you do, but what you do with what life has given you." Those words now acquired a deeper meaning. Room 412 was empty, yes, but that only meant it was ready to receive new stories, new learnings, new opportunities for transformation. And she, Catherine Foster, was ready to accompany those stories not from the invisibility of her old role, but from the full presence of someone who has begun to reconcile her multiple identities into a single, coherent and evolving narrative. The reconstruction of the Al Fayed mansion was progressing well when New York was surprised by an unusual snowfall in early December. The white flakes transformed the metropolis into a fairy tale landscape, temporarily silencing the urban hustle under an immaculate blanket. Catherine watched the snow fall from the window of the provisional library in the penthouse. Before her, advanced nursing books and clinical procedure manuals formed towers that were meticulously organized. She had begun her second year of college with renewed determination, now that the first cycle of personal transformation seemed to be completing. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Isabella's voice, the Cuban-American cook, who was now also studying clinical nutrition thanks to Karim's educational fund, interrupted her contemplation. "Yes," Catherine replied with a smile. "It reminds me of when it snowed in my town. My mother used to say that snow was like a parenthesis that life took to breathe." Isabella sat next to her, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. The relationship between them had evolved remarkably in these months. The initial distrust and rivalry had gradually transformed into mutual respect and finally, an unexpected friendship. "You know what's strangest?" Isabella commented, blowing on her chocolate. "That now, when I prepare menus for the family, I constantly think about nutritional values, about macronutrient balance, things that before I did by instinct or tradition." Catherine nodded understandingly. "The same happens to me when I clean. Now I notice details about hygiene and infection prevention that I used to overlook." They both laughed, recognizing how their studies had even modified their most everyday perceptions. "It's as if we were seeing the world through new eyes," reflected Isabella. "Or as if we had always had that gaze but didn't know how to name it," added Catherine. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Fatima, whose face was beaming with barely contained excitement. "Catherine, I was looking for you. I just finished my first period of internship at the public school in the neighborhood," she announced, dropping into a nearby armchair. "It was transformative." During the next hour, as the snow continued to fall silently over New York, Fatima shared stories about her experiences teaching children from diverse origins, including several young Syrian refugees who barely spoke English. "When I started incorporating traditional Arab tales translated into English, their eyes lit up," she recounted excitedly. Suddenly, they weren't the different children, but the cultural experts who could explain to their American classmates the nuances of the stories. Catherine listened in wonder, recognizing in the young heiress a maturity and commitment that radically contrasted with the rebellious and disinterested girl from months ago. "I've been thinking," Fatima continued, lowering her voice slightly, "I want to create an intercultural educational program, something that integrates Arab narrative traditions into the American school curriculum, using stories as bridges between cultures." "It's a wonderful idea," Catherine responded sincerely. The problem is, Fatima paused, doubting for the first time, I need funds to develop it properly. I could ask my father, but I want this to be completely mine. My genuine contribution, not just another project financed by the family fortune. Isabella and Catherine exchanged understanding looks. Both perfectly understood Fatima's need to establish her own professional identity, independent of the Al-Fayed surname. Have you considered applying for an educational innovation grant? Catherine suggested. Helen, my supervisor at the hospital, mentioned that her husband works at the Department of Education. I could ask her about funding options. Fatima's eyes lit up with renewed hope. Would you do that for me? Of course, Catherine replied naturally, only to realize seconds later the extraordinary role reversal this conversation represented. The former domestic employee now offering professional contacts and guidance to her employer's daughter. That afternoon, as the snow began to melt under a timid winter sun, Catherine received an unexpected call from Richard. Sorry to bother you, he began, his voice conveying a mixture of nervousness and determination. But I need to share something with you. Could we meet? I promise it will be brief. Intrigued, Catherine agreed to meet him at a cafe near the hospital. Upon arriving, she barely recognized the man waiting for her by the window. The Richard who now timidly smiled at her had little to do with the arrogant companion from the restaurant, or even with the weakened patient from room 412. His appearance was healthy, his gaze clear, his posture straight without a trace of the previous arrogance. Thank you for coming, he said, rising to greet her. Once settled with their respective coffees, Richard extracted an envelope from his jacket. I've been sober for 3 months, he announced with quiet pride, and 6 weeks as a volunteer in the accompaniment program for patients with addictions. That's wonderful, Richard. I'm really happy for you. There's more, he continued, sliding the envelope toward her. I've been accepted into a training program to become a certified addiction counselor. I start in January. Catherine opened the envelope, finding the acceptance letter from a prestigious institution specializing in training professionals for addiction treatment. It's extraordinary, she responded sincerely. You've found your vocation. Richard nodded, his eyes bright but serene. Just as you found yours. We both transformed our pain into purpose, although through very different paths. They shared a complicit silence, recognizing without the need for words the extraordinary symmetry of their respective transformations. There's something else I wanted to tell you, Richard finally added. I never properly thanked you for what you did for me at the hospital. I don't just mean the professional care, but the dignity with which you treated me despite how I had treated you before. Catherine felt a lump in her throat. I was just doing my job. No, Richard insisted gently. You did much more. You showed me that it was possible to reinvent oneself, that our worst moments don't have to define us forever. Returning to the penthouse as New York sank into the early darkness of winter, Catherine reflected on this unexpected encounter. How an act of humiliation had triggered a cascade of transformations that now returned to her like a wave of affirmation. At the building's door, she ran into Michael, who was returning from his ecological horticulture classes, his arms loaded with books and small pots where experimental projects were germinating. Look, he proudly showed her one of the pots where tiny green shoots were emerging from the dark soil. Ancient Lebanese seeds that Mr. Karim gave me for my final project, cedars of Lebanon that might someday grow in America. Catherine observed the fragile shoots with admiration. It's incredible how something so small contains so much potential. That's exactly what I was thinking, Michael replied with a complicit smile, but not just about the seeds. That night, while reviewing her advanced surgical nursing notes, Catherine found a passage about the extraordinary regenerative capacity of the human body. Cells constantly renew themselves. Every 7 years, practically all the cells in our body have been replaced. Physically, we are not the same person we were 7 years ago. The biological metaphor resonated deeply within her. Like the seeds under the New York snow, like the tiny Lebanese cedars germinating in Michael's pots, like cells silently renewing themselves, all carried within them the potential for continuous transformation. And in that moment of crystalline clarity, Catherine understood something fundamental. True transformation was not a destination, but a continuous process of death and rebirth, a perpetual cycle where each ending contained the promise of a new beginning. The New York spring exploded in a symphony of colors and aromas when the Al-Fayed family finally returned to the reconstructed mansion. The West Wing, destroyed by fire months ago, had been reborn with an architecture that masterfully fused American and Lebanese elements: wide porches, colonial tiles with Arab geometric motifs, large windows that allowed the New York light to bathe spaces decorated with a harmonious mixture of colonial antiques and Lebanese cedar furniture. Catherine walked through the renovated corridors with a strange sensation of déjà vu mixed with discovery. Her hands, which had cleaned every corner of the previous version of this house, now recognized and at the same time explored this transformed space. "What do you think?" asked Karim, finding her absorbed in the contemplation of the reconstructed library, where shelves of noble wood alternated with decorative niches that displayed pieces of Islamic and American art. "It's as if the house had found its true voice," Catherine replied, surprising herself with the poetic nature of her observation. Karim nodded, pleased with the metaphor. "Exactly. I asked the architect not to reconstruct exactly what we had before, but to create a space that reflected our evolution as a family." Catherine noticed the inclusive "our" and felt a warmth expanding in her chest. She was no longer simply the employee who kept the spaces immaculate. In some indefinable but real way, she had become part of the emotional ecosystem of this family. "There's something I want to show you," continued Karim, guiding her to an area of the house that had previously been simply an occasionally used guest room. Upon opening the door, Catherine caught her breath. The space had been transformed into a small but perfectly equipped apartment. Living room, compact kitchen, bedroom and bathroom, all decorated with elegant simplicity and touches that had undeniably been chosen with her in mind. From the colors to small details like a shelf full of nursing books and American literature. "Your new space," explained Karim, with an expression difficult to decipher. A mixture of pride, nervousness, and something else that Catherine couldn't identify. "So you can have greater independence while finishing your studies." Catherine walked around the apartment with incredulity, gently touching the furniture as if to confirm they weren't an illusion. "It's too much," she finally managed to articulate. "I can't accept it." "It's not a gift," Karim replied firmly. "It's a practical recognition of your evolution. You continue to be an employee of this house, but you're also a nursing student, and soon will be a healthcare professional. This space will allow you to inhabit all those identities simultaneously." The wisdom contained in that explanation disarmed Catherine's protests. Indeed, this apartment was the physical materialization of her transformation, neither completely separated from her past as a domestic employee, nor trapped in it, a bridge between worlds that would allow her to transit between identities with greater fluidity. That night, as Catherine organized her few belongings in her new space, she received a visit from Fatima, who brought a small plant as a housewarming gift. "It's Damascus jasmine," the young woman explained, placing it on the windowsill. "My grandmother in Beirut always said its aroma helps dream with clarity." Catherine thanked her for the gift, moved by the symbolism. The jasmine, with its intense but delicate fragrance, was the perfect ambassador between the Arab world of the Al-Fayeds and her own American roots. "I have news," Fatima announced, sitting on the small sofa. "I've been awarded the grant to develop my intercultural educational program. The contact you gave me at the Department of Education was decisive." Catherine celebrated the news with genuine joy, remembering how months ago she had been the one completely dependent on the Al-Fayed's generosity. Now, in some subtle but significant way, she had begun to return that generosity, closing a circle of reciprocity that balanced the relationship. "And there's more," continued Fatima, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I'd like you to be part of the project as an advisor on the intercultural health component." "Me?" Catherine didn't hide her surprise. "But I'm only in my second year of nursing." "Precisely," Fatima insisted. "You bring a unique perspective. You intimately know both the traditional American culture and the Arab one you've absorbed in this house. And you're studying health from a modern perspective. You're a living bridge between worlds. A living bridge." The metaphor resonated deeply within Catherine, who was beginning to understand that her true value didn't reside in belonging completely to one world or another, but in her capacity to connect them. The next day, during her shift at the hospital, Catherine was assigned to a new patient, an elderly Lebanese woman who had been admitted for cardiac complications and barely spoke English. The woman, visibly distressed, was trying to communicate something to the nurses, but the language barrier made understanding impossible. "Mrs. Adnan," Catherine began in English, checking her vital signs. Then, to the surprise of everyone present, including herself, she added in basic but functional Arabic, "I understand you." "Don't be afraid." The few Arabic phrases she had learned listening to Karim over the years, fragments of phone conversations, instructions to Lebanese suppliers, were sufficient to establish an initial bridge of trust with the patient, whose eyes lit up with gratitude. "I didn't know you spoke Arabic," Helen commented, impressed when Catherine translated the main concerns of Mrs. Adnan. "I don't really," explained Catherine. "I've just absorbed fragments working for a Lebanese family for years, but sometimes fragments are all we need to build a bridge." In the following weeks, Catherine became the unofficial link between Mrs. Adnan and the medical team. This experience crystallized something that had been gestating within her, the understanding that her fragmented identity wasn't a weakness, but an extraordinary strength. As a nurse in training, she could apply modern medical knowledge. As a person familiar with rural American traditions, she understood folk remedies and beliefs. As an employee in a Lebanese house, she had absorbed cultural sensitivities that few American healthcare professionals possessed. One Sunday afternoon, as Catherine studied in the reconstructed garden of the Al-Fayed mansion, Karim joined her, bringing a tray with mint tea and pistachio sweets. "I just received a call from Mrs. Adnan," he commented, serving the tea with the ritual elegance that characterized all his movements. "Her family is deeply grateful for your specialized attention. Apparently, you're the only one at the hospital who understands the importance of orienting her bed toward Mecca." Catherine smiled, remembering how she had discreetly reorganized the furniture of room 528 to respect the patient's spiritual needs. "It's the least I could do," she replied simply. "True care transcends medical procedures." Karim observed her with a mixture of pride and something deeper, an emotion that Catherine didn't dare name, but that warmed her interior more than the aromatic tea. "You know," he began after a contemplative silence, "when I decided to finance your studies, I did it primarily thinking of my sister, Zara. It was an almost selfish act, a way to redeem my inability to help her." Catherine listened, intuiting that this confession would lead to some significant revelation. "What I didn't anticipate," continued Karim, "is how your transformation would transform everyone around you. Fatima finding her vocation, Isabella and Michael pursuing their own educational dreams, even Richard recovering his dignity." He paused, as if seeking the exact words. "You've been like a stone thrown into a pond, creating waves that continue expanding." Catherine felt a lump in her throat at the magnitude of what Karim was describing. She had never considered her impact from this broader perspective. "It wasn't intentional," she finally managed to articulate. "I was just trying to survive, to adapt, to find my way." "Precisely," Karim smiled. "The strongest bridges aren't those built with grandiloquence and fanfare, but those that grow organically, stone upon stone, responding to a genuine need for connection." That afternoon, as the sun began its descent over the New York skyline, Catherine understood that she was participating in the construction of something much more significant than her own individual transformation. She was helping to weave a network of invisible bridges between people, cultures, and identities that, otherwise, would have remained isolated in their respective worlds. And in this complex fabric of connections, she found a purpose that transcended the simplistic categories with which she had previously tried to define herself. She wasn't just a nurse, nor just a domestic employee, nor just a student, nor just a mentor. She was, in essence, a weaver of bridges. The School of Nursing auditorium shone under the spring light that filtered through the tall windows. Rows of chairs arranged in a semicircle gradually filled with students, professors, and family members attending the annual academic recognition ceremony where the most outstanding students of each class were awarded. Catherine nervously smoothed the skirt of her new dress, a gift that Fatima had insisted on giving her for the occasion. The turquoise fabric, elegant but sober, beautifully contrasted with her tanned skin and the simple silver hairpin that gathered her hair, another present this one from Martha, who had traveled from Virginia especially for the ceremony. "You look beautiful," whispered her mother, seated beside her with the serene dignity of someone who has worked hard all her life. "Your father would be so proud." Catherine squeezed Martha's wrinkled hand, too moved to respond verbally. Her mother's presence, with her carefully ironed Sunday dress and her best earrings, the same ones she had worn at her own wedding decades ago, represented a tangible bridge to her roots, a reminder of where she came from and how far she had traveled. On her other side, Karim and Fatima completed this extraordinary circle of support. The Lebanese businessman, impeccable in his Italian designer suit, maintained his usual elegant composure, but Catherine could perceive a certain expectant tension in his posture. Fatima, for her part, didn't hide her enthusiasm, compulsively photographing every detail of the auditorium with her phone. "Who would have thought we'd be here 2 years ago?" commented the young woman, leaning toward Catherine. "You receiving an academic award, me developing an intercultural educational program." Catherine smiled, remembering how their paths had intertwined in unpredictable but significant ways. "Life is amazing when we allow it to surprise us," she replied, inadvertently quoting a phrase that Karim often repeated. The ceremony began with the dean's speech, followed by the presentation of the various awards to outstanding students. Catherine listened with respectful attention, although her mind occasionally wandered to the faces that weren't present, but who had been fundamental in her journey. Richard, now completely committed to his training as an addiction counselor; Isabella and Michael, who had preferred not to miss their own classes despite wanting to accompany her; Helen, her mentor, who participated in the ceremony as part of the faculty; Mrs. Adnan, now recovered and back with her family in the Brooklyn neighborhood; and the extraordinary award to the student who best exemplifies the integration of theoretical knowledge and human sensitivity in clinical practice, the dean finally announced, goes to Catherine Foster, second-year student. A lightning bolt of incredulity struck Catherine. Despite having been previously notified about the award, hearing her name resounding in that auditorium full of people momentarily paralyzed her. "Go on, daughter," whispered Martha, giving her a slight push. The path to the stage seemed eternal. Catherine felt the weight of all the gazes, but especially of 3 pairs of eyes that had witnessed her transformation from different perspectives: those of her mother, who had seen her leave for New York with barely a suitcase and many postponed dreams; those of Fatima, who had evolved from privileged indifference to respect and genuine friendship; those of Karim, who had recognized her potential when she herself couldn't see it. Upon receiving the distinction and certificate, Catherine was invited to address a few words to the audience. She hadn't prepared anything formal, trusting that sincerity would be her best guide. "2 years ago," she began, her voice initially trembling, but gradually gaining firmness, "I was having dinner at a restaurant where a man publicly humiliated me for not being able to afford expensive dishes. That night I thought I had hit rock bottom." An expectant silence settled in the auditorium. No one was expecting such a direct and personal start. What I didn't know then is that sometimes we need to hit bottom to propel ourselves upward. That night of humiliation became the catalyst for a transformation that brought me here. Catherine paused, seeking with her gaze her small but significant family in the audience. "This award is not just mine. It belongs to my mother, Martha, who taught me the value of dignified work and silent perseverance; to Karim Al-Fayed, my employer, who saw potential in me when I myself had forgotten it; to his daughter Fatima, whose own journey of self-discovery intertwined with mine in ways that neither of us could have anticipated." Her eyes scanned the faces of the professors, briefly stopping at Helen, who nodded with discreet approval. "It belongs also to my patients, especially those who taught me that true nursing transcends technical procedures to embrace shared humanity, and to a man who once despised me but later, in his own vulnerability, helped me discover my capacity for compassion without conditions." Catherine took a breath, preparing for the conclusion that had been gestating within her for weeks. This recognition doesn't mark the end of a journey, but a milestone on a continuous path of growth. And for that, I want to announce the creation of a scholarship fund, financed with part of each of my future salaries, destined for women over 40 who wish to resume interrupted studies. A murmur of approval ran through the auditorium. From his seat, Karim watched her with a mixture of surprise and deep pride. This initiative was completely new to him, a step that Catherine had decided to take independently, thus closing a perfect circle of received and returned generosity. Because knowledge and opportunity should not have an expiration date, Catherine continued, her voice now firm and clear, and because sometimes all we need to transform is someone who believes in us when we've stopped believing in ourselves. The applause that followed was genuine and prolonged. Upon returning to her seat, Catherine was received by the emotional embrace of Martha, whose silent tears expressed everything that words couldn't contain. "I'm so proud of you," whispered her mother in her ear. "So proud." Fatima joined the embrace, followed after a moment of hesitation by Karim, creating a physical circle that materialized the invisible bonds they had forged throughout these years of shared transformation. The reception after the ceremony took place in the faculty gardens. Students and family members chatted animatedly while enjoying a light cocktail. Catherine moved among the groups with a quiet confidence that notably contrasted with the insecurity that had characterized her at the beginning of her studies. "Catherine," Helen called her, approaching with a woman of distinguished appearance whom Catherine didn't recognize. "I want to introduce you to Dr. Louisa Martin, director of the transcultural nursing program that will be inaugurated next semester." The woman shook Catherine's hand with professional firmness. "Your speech deeply impressed me," she commented, "especially your mention of Mrs. Adnan and how you adapted care to her specific cultural needs." Catherine thanked her for the compliment, surprised that this detail had reached the director's ears. "We're looking for students with intercultural sensitivity for our pilot program," continued Dr. Martin. "Helen has enthusiastically recommended you, and after hearing you today, I perfectly understand why." A horizon of completely new possibilities opened before Catherine. The transcultural nursing program represented a perfect integration of her diverse worlds, her Virginia roots, her exposure to Lebanese culture in the Al Fayed house, her modern healthcare training. As the doctor explained the details of the program, Catherine observed in the distance how Fatima animatedly conversed with a group of professors about her intercultural educational project, while Karim and Martha, unlikely allies united by their love for her, shared a coffee on a bench under a dogwood tree in bloom. In that crystalline moment of observation, Catherine understood that the true miracle had not been simply her individual transformation from domestic employee to outstanding nursing student. The true miracle resided in how that personal transformation had catalyzed a network of interconnected changes, creating a fabric of renewed relationships where each person involved had found more authentic and full versions of themselves. The recognition ceremony, beyond the formal award received, had become the celebration of something much deeper, the transformative power that emerges when we allow our vulnerabilities to become bridges toward others, and when we recognize that our identities are not rigid prisons, but landscapes in constant evolution. 5 years later, the garden of the Al Fayed mansion was resplendent under the golden evening light of New York. Tables elegantly arranged under pergolas covered with jasmine and bougainvillea welcomed an extraordinary diversity of guests, university professors conversing with gardeners, doctors sharing anecdotes with cooks, students of various nationalities mixing with elderly people from Virginia towns. In the center of this improbable meeting of worlds, a white tent housed a photographic exhibition titled "Invisible Bridges, 5 Years of Intertwined Transformations." The images, captured by Fatima over the years, documented a collective journey that had begun with a humiliation in a restaurant and had blossomed into a network of opportunities, growth, and intercultural connections. Catherine, now a nurse specialized in transcultural care and an associate professor at Columbia, walked through the exhibition with Karim, stopping before a particularly significant photograph. The image showed the original golden envelope that he had given her years ago, next to the document creating the Bridges Foundation, the non-profit organization they had jointly established to expand educational opportunities to people of diverse origins and ages. 5 years, commented Karim, his hair now streaked with grey, his bearing still elegant but softened by time and shared experience. "Sometimes it seems like yesterday when I saw you in that restaurant." Catherine smiled, remembering how much their relationship had changed since then, What began as an act of charity driven by guilt and the memory of a lost sister had gradually transformed into a partnership based on mutual respect and eventually into something deeper that neither had anticipated. "And sometimes it seems like several lives have passed," she replied, aware of how different the people who met that night were compared to who they were now. The celebration that brought them together had multiple purposes: to commemorate the 5th anniversary of the Bridges Foundation, to celebrate the publication of Fatima's book on intercultural education, now implemented in schools across America, and to mark the graduation of the first class of nurses from the transcultural program that Catherine had helped develop. "Catherine!" Richard's voice interrupted her reflections. The man, sober for 5 years, and now director of a rehabilitation center for addictions, was approaching accompanied by Helen, who had become a frequent collaborator of the foundation. "I just told Helen about our plans to expand the therapeutic accompaniment program to Mount Sinai Hospital," he commented enthusiastically. "She thinks it could work even better than at New York Presbyterian." Catherine nodded, secretly marveling at the transformation of this man who had once humiliated her and who now dedicated his life to alleviating the suffering of others. If there was a living proof of the regenerative power of the human spirit, it was Richard. In another part of the garden, Martha shared traditional Virginia recipes with Isabella, now a certified nutritionist specializing in Mediterranean diets. Next to them, Michael explained to a group of horticulture students the principles of the ecological garden he had designed for the mansion, where Lebanese and American plants coexisted in surprising harmony. "Sometimes I think this garden is the best metaphor for what we've built together," commented Fatima, joining Catherine and Karim. "Species that should never thrive together according to traditional botany, and yet here they are, flourishing side by side, because someone had the vision to create the right environment." Catherine embraced the young woman, now an internationally recognized educator, for her pioneering work in transcultural pedagogy. The rebellious millionaire's daughter had found her purpose, honoring her Lebanese roots not through the continuation of the family businesses, but through the creation of educational bridges between cultures. "Your mother would be proud," Karim whispered to his daughter, referring to the wife he had lost decades ago, and whose memory they had honored by naming one of the foundation's main scholarships after her. As night gently fell over New York, the guests gathered for the culminating moment of the celebration. The lantern ceremony, a tradition that Karim and Catherine had created, fusing elements of Lebanese and American celebrations. Each guest received a small paper lantern, inside which burned a candle perfumed with essences of jasmine and rosemary, emblematic fragrances of Lebanon and America. One by one, they briefly shared how their life had changed during these 5 years of crossed connections. "I learned that it's never too late to master technology," commented Martha, holding her lantern with pride as she referenced her recent certification as a digital trainer for elderly people in her town. "I discovered that my hands could create beauty beyond maintaining it," added Michael, whose experimental garden had gained recognition in sustainable horticulture circles. "I understood that true wealth is not measured in bank accounts, but in transformed lives," declared Karim, his gaze briefly meeting Catherine's in a silent exchange loaded with meaning. When her turn came, Catherine observed the faces illuminated by the warm light of the lanterns, faces that represented the diverse world she had learned to inhabit and connect. "5 years ago," she began, her voice clear in the quiet night, "I defined myself by what I did, cleaning houses, serving others, surviving day by day. Now I understand that we are much more than our occupations or circumstances." The light from her lantern projected dancing shadows on her face, highlighting the serenity and wisdom that had replaced the insecurity of years past. "We are bridges," she continued, "between past and future, between cultures and generations, between what we were and what we can become. And it is in that intermediate space, in that light between worlds, where we find our true essence." One by one, the lanterns were released into the night sky, creating an ephemeral but extraordinarily beautiful constellation of ascending lights. Catherine observed their progress with Karim on one side and Fatima on the other, her small improvised family united by bonds that transcended blood and conventions. "There's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time," Karim said softly, when most of the guests had dispersed to continue conversations in small groups. Something that might be the next bridge to cross. Catherine looked at him expectantly, intuiting from his tone that they were about to cross a significant threshold. "These years together have taught me that life offers second chances when we least expect them," he continued, his usual composure slightly altered by an unusual nervousness. "We began as employer and employee, evolved to colleagues in the foundation, and now—" Catherine held her breath, understanding where his words were heading. "And now I wonder if you would be willing to explore another type of partnership," Karim concluded, extracting from his pocket a small cedar box with mother-of-pearl inlays. Before he could open it, Catherine gently placed her hand over his. "The exploration already began some time ago," she replied with a serene smile. "We were just waiting for the right moment to name it." The garden, with its Lebanese jasmine and American dogwood intertwined in harmonious coexistence, was silent witness to this new bridge that was beginning to be built. Not between external worlds, but between two hearts that had learned that differences in origin, culture, or class could be transformed into sources of strength and complementarity instead of obstacles. Under the starry New York sky, the last lanterns were lost in the immensity, reminding all present that some lights, although they seem to fade, continue illuminating paths long after we stop seeing them. And in that moment of perfect convergence between past and future, Catherine understood that true transformation never has a defined end. It is a continuous river of possibilities that flows eternally toward unexplored horizons, nourished by each experience, each connection, each bridge that we dare to build between the diverse worlds we inhabit. "The most powerful light," she thought as she intertwined her fingers with Karim's, "is not the one that eliminates darkness, but the one that teaches us to navigate between shadows, illuminating paths that connect what we are with what we could become."